12 years I've run. Across glittering nebulae, through asteroid storms, and past abandoned space stations where the cold emptiness of the cosmos was the only witness to my fear. 7 of her comrades are already gone, victims of traps, missteps, and the unpredictable chaos of the galaxy, but she has never faltered. Now at last she is here. The Huntress who has shadowed me across light years, whose silver eyes pierce the darkness, whose long ears twitch with deadly precision. She is the last, and this chase, this relentless game of survival, is about to reach its final, impossible climax. The starlight glimmered weakly through the fractured hull of the abandoned orbital station, casting long, jagged shadows across corridors strewn with broken panels and loose wiring. He moved cautiously, careful not to trip over a floating cable or bump into a drifting maintenance drone that had long since gone rogue. Space was silent, and yet in that silence he could almost hear her. 12 years of running, of hiding, of scrambling through the light years like a panicked comet, and still she had always been there, somewhere behind him, like a shadow stretched across galaxies. The man shook his head, letting a small chuckle escape. He muttered to himself, "If she's anywhere near as obsessive about catching me as I am about finding coffee on these stations, I'm doomed." He paused, peering around a corner, and sure enough there she was, or at least, the faint glint of her silver eyes, catching the last reflection of a dying starlight, betrayed her presence. She was impossibly tall, her long, crescent-shaped ears flicking in the low, artificial breeze of the station, giving her a look of grace that was entirely alien yet almost human. Her movements were precise, deliberate, and deadly, but he had learned over the years that precision often came with quirks. A few feet closer, and she stumbled over a small maintenance hatch he'd left carelessly open. He had to bite back a laugh as he ducked behind a bulkhead, the sound of her muted curse echoing faintly through the metallic corridors. "Clumsy, aren't we?" he whispered, almost fondly, and then smirked as he triggered the automated decoy drone he'd set up, a tiny robot that popped out from a maintenance shaft, waving a comical flag with "Gotcha" written in 3 different alien dialects. Her reaction was instantaneous, a roll, a leap, and a glance back that seemed to pierce right through him. For a moment she looked annoyed, then, as if suppressing amusement, she muttered something in a low, musical language he had long since stopped trying to understand, though over the years he'd caught enough fragments to translate most of the tone. "Really? A flag?" she said, and he could swear she was smirking under her armored mask. The corridors were suddenly quiet again, save for the faint hum of life support systems and his own irregular breathing. He moved on, ducking into a maintenance bay that smelled faintly of burnt circuitry and synthetic lubricant. Floating in the low gravity, a toolbox drifted past him, spinning lazily like a tiny satellite. He reached out and caught it, hefting it in one hand while gesturing dramatically toward the open hatch where she had just vanished. "I really should invest in holographic projectiles," he muttered. "Or maybe a confetti cannon. Space confetti is terribly underused." From somewhere deeper in the station, he heard a soft thud. She was there, somewhere, following him through the corridors with that uncanny, silent precision that had earned her the reputation of being the most feared huntress across 3 star systems. She had been hunting him for 12 years, relentless, patient, strategic, and yet, the thing that always threw him off was the way she moved with moments of human-like absurdity. A dropped panel that clanged, a sudden misstep that sent her sliding across the floor just enough to stumble but not enough to ruin her posture. He had learned to anticipate these small moments, and he relied on them. Humor, he realized, was a survival tool just as much as traps or weapons. He pressed himself against a wall, flipping a switch that activated a series of holographic decoys he had set up for this exact moment. Ghostly duplicates of himself appeared at multiple intersections, each waving cheerfully or making exaggerated faces that would have been hilarious under any other circumstance. The Huntress froze mid-step, her ears twitching as she analyzed the pattern. Then, As if deciding he had earned some points for creativity, she sighed, a sound that was almost human in its exasperation, and charged toward one of the holograms. The man rolled his eyes and whispered to the empty corridor, "Honestly, you could have just walked in, but new, dramatic flair is mandatory." He darted into the next corridor, launching another decoy that played a recording of him singing an off-key tune about asteroid maintenance crews. He didn't think she had ears sensitive enough to detect pitch, but the sound startled a few small floating drones, which then careened into her path, forcing her to leap aside. She didn't curse this time. She merely muttered something in that musical alien language, which he translated in his head as, "You will pay for that." He had to laugh. 12 years, countless encounters across empty voids, asteroid belts, derelict stations, and yet here they were, him improvising with ridiculous tactics, her pursuing with deadly intent, and both somehow surviving. He remembered the first time they had met, on a moon where the gravity had been barely a quarter of Earth's. She had landed with a graceful, terrifying sweep of her blade, and he had stumbled backward into a vat of fermented alien fruit juice, slipping and landing with a splash that made her pause, mid-leap, in sheer disbelief. That memory still made him grin. As he rounded another corner, he tripped over a floating cable, an old piece of equipment he had neglected to secure, and sent himself tumbling into a pile of crates. One crate opened on impact, spilling small spheres that rolled in every direction, their surfaces reflecting the dim emergency lights. He quickly scrambled to his feet, holding one like a grenade. He whispered to himself, "If she catches me now, at least I die laughing." And then he saw her, standing at the other end of the corridor. Silver eyes gleaming, long ears flicking in anticipation, a smirk playing across her angular face. She had always been beautiful in that terrifying alien way, and she had always been one step behind, or so it seemed. He raised a sphere, tossing it carefully toward a wall. It bounced, rolled, and emitted a soft, high-pitched squeal, drawing her attention. She dove, missed it, cursed melodiously, and landed prone with a grace that made him wonder how much practice she had put into every fall, every leap, every blade swing. He shook his head, ducking into another maintenance alcove. 12 years of running, 12 years of traps, pranks, and narrow escapes, and somehow the universe had made this absurd, deadly, cosmic game their life. He let out a long sigh, speaking aloud as though she might hear him. "You know, for the last 12 years, I've been planning elaborate escape routes, hiding in asteroid fields, hacking starports, and honestly, nothing prepared me for your ridiculous flair for dramatics. You could teach comedy if you weren't so obsessed with murder." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive with possibility, tension softened by the ridiculous, the absurd, the small humor that kept him sane across galaxies. Somewhere she was watching, analyzing, calculating. Somewhere she was considering how to outmaneuver him, all while probably muttering about his audacity, his luck, and the audacious way he had managed to turn survival into a comedy routine. He moved forward slowly, one hand on a support rail, the other holding the small sphere like a weapon, and whispered, "All right, silver ears, time for another round. Let's see if your grace can handle the ultimate prank." A zero-gravity dance-off. The station creaked, lights flickered, and a drone floated past, buzzing like a disapproving referee. Somewhere deep inside, he knew she would roll her eyes, mutter something unintelligible, and then chase him with the same relentless precision she had shown for 12 years. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel entirely afraid. Humor, wit, and absurdity had become his shield, his sword, and his constant companion. As he launched another holographic decoy, twirling it theatrically, he grinned. 12 years of being hunted, 12 years of barely escaping, and somehow in the empty corridors of a dying station across the vastness of space, he felt almost at home. The hum of the ion engines in the cargo hold was punctuated by the occasional creak of stressed metal as the abandoned freighter drifted through the cold, empty orbit of a gas giant. He floated lightly, tethered only by a thin cord that clipped to the rail above, juggling two maintenance drones like oversized juggling balls. One beeped erratically, circling around his head, while the other refused to follow his commands, spinning lazily in zero gravity as if mocking him. He grinned. Really, after 12 years of chasing, you still can't tell a drone from a hat stand. He flicked a switch on his control pad, causing the rebellious drone to puff out a cloud of harmless smoke. The smoke swirled around him in slow-motion tendrils, creating a strange, almost theatrical effect, as though he were performing in some absurd interstellar ballet. Somewhere nearby, he knew, she was watching. The Huntress. Her long ears twitched, catching every minute sound. He could practically hear her sigh, the metallic brush of her boots against the hull, the subtle rhythm of her breathing, steady, controlled, perfectly alien. 12 years of pursuit had made her a master of patience, but even the master could be amused by folly, and he had made it his business to be as foolish as humanly possible, especially when cornered. "All right, you melodramatic murder machine," he whispered, floating over to a supply crate and tapping it gently. A panel slid open, releasing a small cluster of gravity spheres that hung in midair like luminescent orbs. He nudged one and it drifted lazily toward a conduit. As it hit, it exploded softly with a harmless flash and a puff of multicolored foam. "Surprise! Birthday party for one, and yes, you're invited," he muttered, ducking behind a bulkhead before she could react. She moved with silent elegance, dodging the foam with an almost imperceptible roll, landing lightly on the opposite side. Her silver eyes glimmered in the low light, scanning the corridor, calculating. For a moment he imagined she might speak, but she didn't. Instead, she tilted her head, long ears flicking in curiosity, and in a tone that could have been mockery or admiration, she whispered, "Human ingenuity tedious." He chuckled softly, letting the humor settle in his chest like warm plasma. He floated toward the opposite end of the hold, casually tossing another drone in her direction. It wasn't armed. It beeped and twirled, projecting a holographic image of a tiny alien creature holding a sign that read, "Catch me if you can." The Huntress's eyes narrowed, but there was no rush, no panic, just a deliberate, almost playful calculation. 12 years of chasing had not dulled her patience, but he had learned over time that humor could disarm, distract, and occasionally delay death by a few precious seconds. He remembered the time he had escaped her on the methane moon of Xyrella 7 by rigging a floating crate to look like himself, only to have it roll down the incline of a crystal canyon and launch itself into the atmosphere, leaving her momentarily confused while he slithered away in a small mining pod. That escape had ended with him crashing into a lake of liquid ammonia and surfacing with a grin and a mouthful of icy gas. She had laughed. Not a lot, but enough that he remembered the sound for years. Humor, even amidst life-and-death chases, had become a secret weapon, one he wielded carefully. He drifted to the control panel of the freighter's navigation deck, fingers dancing across the holographic keys. Lights flickered, and the ship's internal map projected in the air, revealing a labyrinth of tunnels, cargo bays, and maintenance corridors, all potential traps, all carefully prepped over months of planning. He adjusted the gravity fields in select corridors, creating a gentle disorientation that would make any pursuer hesitate if only for a moment. Those moments were all he needed. He smiled. "Just enough to keep the chase interesting," he whispered, scanning for movement. Her presence was sudden. One moment the corridor was empty, the next, a shadow fell across the wall, accompanied by a soft, calculated step. She was there, landing with a light thud that barely disturbed the zero-gravity environment. Long ears flicking, silver eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, she was every bit as lethal and beautiful as the stories claimed. But there was a humor to her movements today, a subtle acknowledgement of the ridiculousness of their endless game. He tossed a small device to the floor. It erupted into a cloud of holographic bubbles, each reflecting distorted, comical images of his face. She raised an eyebrow, and he swore he saw the corners of her mouth twitch in what could have been a suppressed smile. "You are incorrigible," she said, her voice musical, alien, and utterly intimidating. He floated closer, casually twirling a tool like a baton. "Well, 12 years of being hunted tends to bring out the creative side," he said. "You should try it sometime. Laughing helps with endurance, I hear." Her response was a soft hiss, barely audible, as if she were restraining herself from snapping the tool in half. Yet she didn't move aggressively. Instead, she began to walk slowly along the corridor, circling him like a predator, her silver eyes following his every twitch and gesture, calculating, planning, but also observing. Perhaps the years had changed something between them. Perhaps humor, absurdity, and repeated narrow escapes had forged a strange bond, unspoken and impossible to define. He drifted toward the side hatch, one hand brushing against a maintenance panel. The panel opened, releasing a stream of small, luminescent spheres that floated toward her. They bounced off her armor harmlessly, each leaving a faint trail of sparkling light. She ducked, rolled, and recovered, landing with elegance. But the tension in her movements was tempered by the faint, almost imperceptible shake of amusement in her posture. He laughed quietly, floating toward the center of the hold. "You know, for someone with the reputation of being the most relentless hunter in 3 systems, you're surprisingly graceful when dodging foam and sparkly balls." He tossed another sphere that bounced erratically across the floor, narrowly missing her boots. "I should call this tactical comedy, patent pending." For a moment, neither of them moved. The hum of the freighter's systems filled the silence. Then she spoke again, low and musical. "Your audacity is irritating." He grinned at the choice of words. It was the closest she had come to complimenting him in 12 years. "Thank you," he said, bowing theatrically in zero gravity. "I try." He nudged a nearby crate, sending it spinning toward her. She flipped over it effortlessly, landing behind him, forcing him to leap onto a floating platform to avoid being cornered. He waved mockingly. "Ah, bravo, 10 points for style." She paused, silver eyes scanning him with that uncanny precision. He felt her weighing every option, every possible attack, every potential trap he had set. And yet in that scrutiny there was amusement. Perhaps she recognized him now not just as prey, but as a worthy adversary, a human who could survive, who could joke in the face of death, who could turn a chase into something absurdly entertaining. He floated past another maintenance hatch, tossing a drone toward it. The drone emitted a bubble of holographic confetti, spinning lazily through the air. She lunged, knocked the confetti aside, and landed with perfect poise, ears flicking in irritation. Or was it delight? He couldn't tell, and that ambiguity made him grin. "Seriously," he whispered, leaning against a console, "you've got to lighten up. 12 years of murder and pursuit is exhausting. Take a day off, watch a Nebula documentary, eat a gelberry or 2. Relax." She didn't respond immediately, just shifted her weight, circling him like a cat, alien, deadly, and impossibly elegant. Finally she spoke, her voice low, smooth, and teasing in its own alien way. "Perhaps, when you stop annoying me with ridiculous pranks, human." He floated backward, mock-offended. "Oh, I see. So now you're criticizing my comedic genius, after 12 years of perfect execution." He tossed another holographic sphere that popped into a silly cartoonish hat above her head. She ducked with precision, and he couldn't help but laugh. And so the game continued. Floating drones, harmless explosions, and absurd pranks danced through the freighter's corridors. 12 years of pursuit, countless escapes, yet somehow, laughter had become their shared companion. Tension existed, yes, but it was tempered by wit, humor, and a strange recognition of one another's skill. The Huntress moved with lethal grace, he dodged with reckless creativity, and in the cold expanse of space, amid flickering lights and floating debris, a bizarre, unspoken bond took shape, one that made 12 years of running not just bearable, but strangely enjoyable. The asteroid field shimmered like broken glass beneath the light of a distant binary star, casting fractured reflections across the hull of the battered freighter. He floated carefully between the jagged rocks, each movement calculated yet oddly casual, as though he were strolling through a crowded market, instead of navigating a treacherous maze where one wrong step could end 12 years of running. The Huntress was somewhere behind him, he could feel it, not just a presence but a weight, a rhythm that had become intimately familiar over the years. Her long ears twitched in zero gravity, catching every echo, every subtle shift of metal, every whispered hiss of pressurized air. Yet somehow the tension was softened by absurdity. A drifting maintenance drone he had rigged earlier hovered nearby, waving a tiny flag that read *final round. No refunds. He grinned, nudging it gently so it spun like a top, and whispered, "You know, if you weren't so obsessed with catching me, I'd consider hiring you as a drone supervisor. You've got talent." The thought was ridiculous, he knew, but humor had always been his secret weapon, a way to keep the fear from settling into his bones. 12 years of being hunted had taught him that survival wasn't just about speed or cunning. It was about keeping your mind light even when the universe seemed determined to crush it. The Huntress appeared then, seemingly out of nowhere, landing on a narrow ledge of rock with perfect grace. Her silver eyes glimmered with the faint reflection of the binary stars, and her long ears flicked, catching the subtle vibrations of his laughter. She studied him for a long moment, and he met her gaze steadily. "You're finally here," he said, the words calm, almost casual though they carried the weight of years. 7 are gone, you're the last. For a heartbeat, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. The silence of the asteroid field, punctuated only by the faint hum of the freighter's emergency systems and the gentle clinking of loose debris, made the moment feel like a stage set for a cosmic duel. But then she did something unexpected. She tilted her head, the long ears curving delicately, and for the first time he saw not just the predator but the person beneath the myth, the alien who had pursued him relentlessly, who had laughed only once but whose presence had shaped him in ways he hadn't acknowledged until now. He raised a hand casually, and a tiny holographic sphere popped from his wrist device, spinning lazily between them. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, grinning. "Blow me into a million pieces, or can we settle this over coffee?" The joke was absurd in the midst of potential death, but he had learned over the years that levity could pierce even the most impenetrable tension. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she activated her blade, a gleaming weapon that shimmered faintly with energy, and it hummed as she twirled it with effortless precision. But there was a hesitation now, a subtle shift in her stance that betrayed uncertainty or perhaps admiration. He had grown over the course of their pursuit, not just surviving each encounter but learning, adapting, even playing with her in ways that had forced her to adjust. They had become partners in a deadly, absurd dance across the stars, and for the first time, the dance seemed poised to end not in death but in recognition. He floated toward a narrow corridor that led deeper into the asteroid, pushing aside jagged panels and floating crates. She followed, blade ready, but he tossed another small drone ahead, projecting a hologram of himself in a dramatic pose, holding a sign that read, "You can't catch perfection." She ducked, rolled, and for a moment he thought he saw her exhale a laugh. It was fleeting, nearly swallowed by the echoing rocks, but it was there. Humor, even amidst confrontation, had created a bridge between hunter and hunted. The man navigated the asteroid maze with a grace born of 12 years of running. Every twist, every floating panel, every unstable rock had been memorized, yet he didn't rush. The stakes were high, yes, but he had changed. Fear no longer dictated his actions. Creativity, humor, and observation did. He had learned patience, the subtle art of misdirection, and the weight of experience. Every narrow escape had been a lesson, every joke a shield. He realized now that the Huntress had been a teacher as much as an adversary. They reached the central cavern of the asteroid, a natural amphitheater where light from the binary stars pierced through cracks, illuminating dust motes that floated like stars caught in a nebula. He stopped, letting his tethered tools drift lazily around him. She landed opposite, blade humming faintly, but she didn't advance immediately. For the first time, he felt no panic, only a calm understanding. This was not just a confrontation, it was a culmination. "You've survived everything," she said finally, her voice soft, musical, yet edged with that familiar intensity. "How?" He shrugged, letting a small sphere drift between them. 12 years of running teaches you a thing or two," he said. "Also humor keeps the brain alive and the pride intact." He grinned. "Seriously, don't underestimate the power of a well-timed pun in zero gravity." For a moment, the tension hung like a fragile filament. Then slowly, she lowered her blade, ears flicking in a subtle gesture that might have been respect or relief. The dance of pursuit had ended not with a clash, but with recognition. He had grown, not just in skill and cunning, but in understanding. He realized that survival was more than evading death. It was about navigating challenges with creativity, wit, and an openness to connection, even with someone who had been his relentless adversary. They drifted toward each other, cautiously, then more deliberately, the floating debris around them creating a shimmering veil that made their interaction feel suspended in time. He reached out, not in threat but in gesture, an acknowledgement of the journey they had shared across light years of pursuit. She mirrored him, a tentative step that ended with a mutual nod, a silent agreement that the game was over. He smiled, finally allowing himself to relax fully. "You know," he said, floating alongside her as the asteroid drifted silently in the binary star's glow, 12 years of being hunted really changes a person. Makes you value small victories, appreciate absurdity, and recognize talent when you see it." She made no immediate response, but her silver eyes held something new, a glimmer of something he had never noticed before. Respect, perhaps even a trace of friendship forged in the crucible of pursuit. It was a connection that defied the predator-prey dynamic, a bond formed across the voids of space, built on understanding, humor, and the art of surviving against impossible odds. Together they floated toward the exit of the cavern, past the glowing dust, the jagged rocks and the fractured light, leaving behind the corridors, the decoys, and the holographic pranks that had marked 12 years of relentless chase. He realized now that he was no longer the same man who had run from system to system, terrified and desperate. He was wiser, sharper, and more resilient, tempered not just by danger, but by the absurdity and humor he had used to survive it. The asteroid's shadow stretched long over the gas giant below, and for the first time in over a decade, the Huntress and the human man moved not as adversaries, but as equals, acknowledging the years spent in pursuit, the countless brushes with death, and the small, ridiculous victories that had kept life bright even amidst the cold, dark expanse of space. He glanced at her one last time, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You know," he said softly, "we could have made a great team. Imagine the chaos we'd caused together." She tilted her head, ears flicking, and for the briefest moment he thought he saw a smile. Then she said, "Perhaps in another life, human." He laughed quietly, the sound carrying across the cavern like a small starburst. "I'll hold you to that," he said, and together they drifted into the open expanse, leaving behind the ghosts of their chase, the echoes of humor and fear, and stepping into the uncertain, infinite stretch of space. Both changed, both grown, and both strangely connected in ways the galaxy itself might never understand.